Good afternoon and welcome all. Thank you for joining us this afternoon on the second in the series of the Expel UK webinars, the Silicon Valley Bank Collapse Fallout, How to Protect Yourself Against BEC. My name's Chris Waynforth, and I have over 20 years experience in fraud prevention and cybersecurity. And I lead the business here at Expel as General Manager. I'm delighted to be joined by two of our wonderful solution architects. First up, we have Silvia. She joins us actually from Zscaler, where she led the technical engagement with some of the largest customers, and joins us as a senior solutions architect. Welcome, Silvia.
Welcome, thank you.
And hey, no worries. And then we also have Astha with us. Astha came to Expel from VMware Carbon Black. Before that, though, she was also a cybersecurity engineer at Vodafone in their SOC. Welcome, Astha.
Hi there.
So before we get going, let's take a look at what happened and why did it matter. Earlier this year, many of you will know that Silicon Valley Bank was the first of the 3 US banks to fail. Along with First Republic Bank and Signature Bank, they represented 2.4% of all the assets in the US banking industry. And this collapse that we saw this year was, we saw a huge rise in the number of business email compromise attacks, leading to fraudulent banking transactions, and in a number of cases, multi-million-pound losses. If you were working in the industry back in 2008, you'll remember the last big banking crisis impacting the overall financial sector, so namely the global credit crunch. The stark difference between 2008 and today is the speed at which the fraudsters were able to take advantage of the news story and trick innocent users into transferring large sums of money, in many cases before the target company even had a chance to react. Today, almost every company is a software company, digitally connected to its customers and suppliers in ways that open everyone up to business email compromise. This session will provide you with examples of what happened, why it matters, and also importantly, what each of you can do to prevent it from impacting your organization. With that in mind, I'd like to hand over to Silvia to take you through the next portion of the webinar.
Thank you, Chris. So Chris has mentioned that there was a lot of BEC or business email compromise to the back of the Silicon Valley Bank fallout. So what do we mean by BEC and how big of a threat is it? So business email compromise, BEC, literally as its name rightly says, is when someone's email account gets compromised by a hacker, and then that hacker typically uses that access to that email account to trick other people into sending money or sensitive information. Compromising someone's account or email accounts can happen in many ways, but the most common way is through phishing. Typically, the victim of a BEC incident gets sent a legitimate looking phishing email, say from the likes of a Microsoft Office 365 saying your password has expired and you need to reset it. So typically credential harvesting type emails. But because that link was fake, of course, they got hold of the credentials. MFA, of course, is a great first step to ensure that hackers can't access and compromise an email account with just a password and make it harder. But we will see in the next slide how hackers are getting more creative and now have ways to bypass MFA too. So now that that hacker has access to the email account, they will start studying that person's style and start studying all the emails and start looking for key people, key emails, things like invoices, and start impersonating that victim. For that matter, BEC is an incredibly difficult threat to spot, as the person receiving that email from that compromised account just sees an email coming from a legitimate email address from someone they know. And again, as mentioned, these hackers make sure to gain their trust by studying their styles and their patterns. It's also quite difficult to spot with email tools, as it's simply someone logging into an email account. And with AI, this will be even harder to spot BEC, because tools like ChatGPT can help formulate emails at scale. You input it a bunch of example emails and it will write an email for us where it already imitates the style of that person without the likes of any spelling mistakes and so on. So how big of a threat is BEC? At the beginning of this year, we released our Great Expeltations annual report, where we summarized all that we saw last year. What were the most common threats? What are the trends, and how to best prepare for 2023? And here are a couple of the key findings relating to BEC. Firstly, we saw that 50%, so half of all the incidents that we dealt with, were BEC incidents, which was very similar to what we saw in 2021, remaining to be the top threat across all of our customers. To give an idea of the impact, 53% of organizations experienced at least one BEC attack, and we even saw one organization that was targeted 104 times. We have seen that there's been an increase in BEC continuously, especially since we are working from home, because more and more important transactions are happening over email. Things like signing contracts or sending money transfers, and so on are all happening over email. Secondly, another thing that we saw was that, as mentioned, a lot of the email accounts get compromised to the back of credential harvesting phishing emails. And we saw that 88% of all phishing emails that we saw were credential harvesting emails. Thirdly, we saw that email accounts are not the only ones getting compromised. Our SOC also saw what we call business application compromise, or BAC, where business applications also get compromised in a very similar way. So for example, we saw a case where someone's Workday account got compromised via a phishing email, and that hacker directly modified that user's payroll settings to add their direct deposit information and redirect that victim's paycheck into the attacker's account. Just imagine the impact if someone hacked into an application like Okta, where a hacker would get SSO access to a lot of critical applications. And finally, whilst implementing MFA is one of the most important preventions against BEC, as mentioned, we started to see that threat actors are getting very creative on bypassing MFA. Something that we saw last year was adopting frameworks such as Evil Genius, where a hacker uses a phishing email, but also sets a man-in-the-middle server to redirect users to the real Office 365 website, for example, get them to authenticate and do MFA as normal there, but they're stealing the session cookies on the way, and then they can directly access those applications bypassing MFA altogether. So this is a summary of the findings. In summary, it is a big deal. We're seeing a lot of it, and we're seeing more and more of it. So it's very important to stay on top of BEC and how to protect yourself from it. Anyone can be a victim of BEC. However, I wanted to walk through a couple of the most common examples. We see a lot of data theft, typically HR departments getting their email accounts compromised and then tricking people into giving personal information so that the hacker can typically carry out other BEC attacks with that information. Secondly, one of the most common BEC examples is targeting executives. So say hacking into a CEO's email account and then use that power to start giving instructions to send money or gift cards. Thirdly, finance departments, of course, are very targeted because compromising a finance employee's email account means that they can start emailing suppliers with fake invoices. Fourth, we see what we call the false invoice scheme, where vendors get their email accounts compromised and then they start sending out fake bills. And lastly, lawyers as well, very targeted. If a lawyer's account gets compromised, again, they can start sending invoices out. I just wanted to touch on this because BEC is seen really everywhere. It's really beyond just the CEO fraud. It could be your mortgage provider's account that gets compromised. It could be your phone provider. And we've even seen cases of romance BEC, where an attacker tricks you into pretending to be a lover you met online, start gaining your trust, and then convince you to send money to places or make investments. So it can really be in a lot of shape and forms. Cool. So I've talked a lot about the theory of BEC. I'm going to pass it over to Astha to bring it a lot more to life with a BEC scenario.
Hi guys. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take everyone along on a journey to someone's day, Bob's day, as he gets hit with BEC and how quickly it can go downhill. So setting the scene and introducing our good friend Bob. Our friend Bob is the CFO of a medium-sized UK-based company that specializes in importing and selling high-end electronic gadgets. He has a team of 50 and an annual revenue of 5 million. And as it's an international business, they operate primarily through email communication with both their suppliers and their clients. Now, his day. So how his day started is, a regular day, he receives an email, right? And the email is from their supplier in China, and they've requested a payment of £100,000 for a recent invoice, right? So, and Bob thinks back, okay, the timing for the invoice is correct. He's expecting it to come through because there has recently been work done. All the itemized items on the invoice are all correct. And Bob has done all of his training videos, about phishing. He's spoken to the IT team. He knows what to look out for. He is confident that the email is legitimate because, it checks out. The logo checks out. The email signature checks out. All the other details, the tone of communication that the supplier usually speaks to him in checks out. So he's confident that this is a legitimate email. And what he does is he initiates the payment. So because he believes it to be genuine, he, sends the payment to the account that has been specified in the email. And later in the afternoon, a few hours later, he receives another email. He receives an email requesting the payment for the same invoice. And that is when he realizes that he has now fallen victim to BEC. So what are the consequences now that he has to deal with? So after the many consequences, the most obvious one is the financial loss, right? So he's made a financial loss of the money that he's paid to the supplier, which is not, recoverable. Additionally, he's now incurred legal fees and costs associated with investigating the scam. And this has now caused cash flow issues within the company. So there's missed payments to other suppliers, threatening the entire company's solvency because they have to now take out a loan as a stopgap to missed payments. There's also damage to the reputation and a loss of trust, right? So customers, suppliers, any other stakeholders involved in the company have lost trust in the company's ability and also Bob's ability to conduct business securely and responsibly. And this can lead to not only short-term loss of business, but also long-term damage to a company's brand. And finally, there's legal risks, right? Because the company had decided, getting a good enough cyber insurance wasn't a priority. They had never sort of gotten something adequate. So they didn't have that cyber insurance. So they had to take legal action against the bank. The company is also legally liable to compensate their suppliers for the payments that were never received. So there's legal battles. And furthermore, there's investigations to be done now by the authorities. So overall, Bob's had a very bad day. So Silvia, what is the solution here? It can't possibly be to never open an email again, right?
Definitely. Did you want to talk about a couple UK examples as well?
Oh, yes. So, as I've mentioned, all of the scenarios that we've had for Bob is something we've made up, but this happens in real life all the time. And it happens with companies of all shapes and sizes. So, for example, Red Kite Community Housing, which is a UK-based nonprofit that deals with housing, lost a lot of money because cyber attackers managed to steal money by impersonating a supplier. And for a nonprofit, this is a devastating loss. Another example is a museum in Netherlands where the cyber criminals infiltrated email accounts of one of the dealers involved in the transaction, costing them again millions. And years down the line, after the incident, there's still an ongoing lawsuit and appeals between the museum and the dealer, which kind of shows that there's very far-reaching consequences. And finally, Toyota is probably a brand that everybody's heard of. They lost a lot of money in, $37 million because a third-party hacker posing as a business partner sent emails to the finance team and the accounting team to get money to be sent to an account controlled by the hacker. And this means, you know, even big brands are not immune to this kind of attack vector. In fact, it's even worse because Toyota is so large. This transaction actually took a while for the alarm bells to be rung. You know, it wasn't, nobody noticed. So yeah, Silvia, if you could tell us what the solution is,
yeah,
and how you can protect business.
So precisely, we've just seen, thanks to Astha's examples, how it's part of a user's job to just open emails, click on links and attachments, and it's really hard to spot BEC even if you've done all the training in the world. So how is it that you can protect your business from business email compromise, and how can Expel help? So firstly, the first thing that Expel does to help protect with BEC is that we integrate with your Gmail or your Office 365 email accounts to receive all user-submitted phishing emails for those people that have spotted that weird behavior. We also additionally look for suspicious domains or suspicious keywords to detect phishing emails proactively as well before users submit them. We then look into all of these potential phishing emails, we triage and investigate them to identify if any of those were actually malicious, to block them and prevent them before they lead to credential harvesting or even malware attacks. So if Expel detects that any of those emails were phishing emails, we can automatically remove those from any affected mailbox. However, if a phishing attack is successful, which as we've just seen is completely likely as it's very hard to spot, we also integrate with all other attack surfaces, as we can see here on the left, having visibility into things like the endpoint, the network, Kubernetes environment, cloud, SaaS, SIEM, and so on. We feed all of that data to our platform called Workbench, and then we apply our own detections to quickly find things that don't look right. So things like risky configuration changes or attempts to bypass multi-factor authentication or suspicious geolocation logins. With the support of the automation and Workbench, our Expel analysts provide a thorough yet simple to understand report at the end with all the details, and they can do this very quickly. Things like who received that phishing email, who clicked on that link, who downloaded any attachments. If they did, what was all the damage, and how can we fix that damage? How can we contain any infected endpoints or prevent any further lateral movement on the network? And finally, provide recommendations so that this doesn't happen again. A lot of these actions can also be automated so that we can act very quickly. And actually, our average time between receiving an alert or a piece of log and then completely fixing it with the automation is under 22 minutes in average, and even under 5 minutes for critical alerts. So most times, like we said, it's very hard for a user to spot a BEC email. However, once an attacker does compromise an email account, the hackers will start to do things that typical users don't do, including covering their own tracks. And this is exactly the kinds of things that we look out for. So here are a few examples of things that we watch out for. So number one, a lot of weird inbox rules that start to get created, such as automatically forwarding hidden folders or automatically deleting messages. Or we look for certain keywords that are related to BEC. We also look for new mailbox forwarding to external addresses or successful mailbox logins within minutes of denied logins. That is suspicious as well. Or any new mailbox delegates. Or logins from proxies or VPN services, which are unusual, or again, very importantly, things like unusual geolocation login. So we can write all of these detections thanks to the fact that we integrate with key SaaS applications such as Office 365, Google Workspace, Gmail, Duo, Okta. All of these different tools generate a lot of very valuable logs that help us look for all of this suspicious behavior so we can catch BEC. So again, I talked about how Expel can help, but again, Astha's going to bring it back to life with an example of how we spotted a phishing attempt to the back of the SVB fallout.
Yeah, so we actually expected the failure of Silicon Valley Bank to open the door to like lots of counterparty fraud attempts. You know, when there's incidents like this, it kind of leaves it ripe for opportunity. So there's a lot of increased volume of bank account switching between people, and this presents a massive opportunity for payment counter fraud. So, you know, if an attacker is able to deceive someone into altering just a few accounts, a few routing numbers, they can direct that money to themselves rather than, you know, into your vendors or your own accounts. So we were expecting it to happen. And as expected, it wasn't long before we saw our first fraud attempt via phishing. And because we knew that our customers could potentially be likely targets of SVB phishing attempts, our security operations center analysts, so our SOC team, were on it before the customers could even submit the suspicious email to the team. And here's how we did it. So the very first thing that we did, our analysts did, was they created a Yara rule to help identify any email affiliated keywords or domains like Silvia explained. So anytime this rule was triggered, it would automatically take this alert and add it to our high priority investigation queue. And as it turns out, this is exactly how the attack began. So what you're seeing on screen now is a real example. So there was a rule match that triggered an alert, and the severity of the alert was increased as per the rule, so that it was placed high up in our queue and it was in front of our analysts' eyes ASAP. And they noted that, you know, the email header looks a little bit suspicious, it's displaying signs of spoofing. And then from there, what we did was we saw that the sender's IP address wasn't actually affiliated with DocuSign. So we were seeing red flags popping up all over the place. Then what we did was we examined the body of the email. Bear in mind, this email looks very legitimate. You know, there's no obvious spelling mistakes, grammar mistakes, punctuation, the logo is all correct, everything looks correct. But when you observe the email address, even though it comes from the domain svp.com, it wasn't actually coming from an SVP employee. So this is an attacker that's impersonating an employee to masquerade as somebody who's a legitimate party, right? And so even though the email looks very legitimate, given the circumstances surrounding the collapse of the bank and all the other red flags that we've identified, our team was closer to knowing that this is most likely a phishing attempt. It is also standard practice within our SOC to double check, you know, any risks associated with action items. So that big yellow review documents button, we wanted to check what it led to or what it was asking to do. And it actually led to a illegitimate customer login page, which was spoofed to mimic, you know, the real page. And it's asking them to submit their SVP account credentials. So in this case, in this customer's case, you know, because of our custom Yara detections, because of our analysts and all the work that they did, we caught this before the customers even had time to. So that is how we spotted and prevented an SVP phishing attempt. And in that case, if we could actually, you know, take a step back and go back to our scenario with our dear friend Bob, who is suffering, poor man. If we could rewind and walk through that exact same scenario, but this time with Expel, what would have happened? So let's do that. Here, again, Bob receives an email with the same invoice for the work that's being done by his suppliers. But this time, our analysts have created rules to identify any emails affiliated with, you know, any affiliated keywords and domains. So it gets pushed up to the priority list and our analysts look at it. They then alert Bob to this threat, who calls his suppliers, calls them on the phone, double checks with them, confirms that this is a fraudulent email and does not make the payment. He goes about his day, and what he does, he gets resilience recommendations from Expel at the end of the day to tell him what he can do better to protect himself from these threats in the future. So with Expel, it's not a bad day, it's just a day. So Silvia, what are some of the things that we likely suggested as Expel that Bob implement in the future?
Definitely. So a couple tips to wrap up on things you can do to protect yourself from or your business from BEC. Number one, enabling MFA should be, at least at the very minimum, the bread and butter. Enabling MFA for email access and for any other key critical applications. We saw that 38% of the BEC attacks could have been stopped simply by enabling MFA. Also enabling FIDO or certificate-based authentication to stop those attack in the middle or man in the middle attacks, the evil genius type attacks that I was mentioning. Secondly, watch your geolocation records. 68% of the incidents that we found, actually we detected through using geolocation records. So looking at those, Okta, Duo, or even key geolocation details coming from the SaaS applications themselves really helps identify this is really an unusual geolocation, immediately alert and look into it. Thirdly is a very physical thing. So better validation processes in general. Anything for any large financial transactions or anything important, just looking and reviewing at the validation processes, like as I mentioned, calling the vendor before making a large payment or making a phone call to that CEO that's claiming you to make a big transfer, or even requiring physical signature on paper if needed. So just reviewing the processes. And lastly, just being familiar with the common BEC tactics to know what to look for. As mentioned earlier around our detections, 32% of the attempts we detected by alerting ourselves on things like inbox rules, such as that folder redirection or delegation. So I'm just going to pass it back to Chris to wrap up and share any closing thoughts.
Thank you very much. Let's not forget, every company these days is essentially a software company in some form or another. We're all digitally connected to each other. So I encourage all of you to take action on these 4 tactics to help you better protect your business from BEC. As Silvia said, it's seen everywhere in lots of shapes and sizes, from a dating app to a payroll system. So as well as taking these tips on board, we would love for you to get in contact with us. We're offering a free trial of our technology-forward SOC as a service platform, Workbench. And so please get in contact. But lastly, let me just finally say thank you. Thank you to all of you for listening to our webinar. And also, most importantly, thank you to Silvia and Astha for taking us through such a wonderfully comprehensive answer to the BEC problem.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.